From freight to equipment to building supplies, loads come in all shapes and sizes. And there are many different ways to rig them. If we miss a step in the rigging process, things could go seriously wrong. In order to prevent rigging-related accidents, we need to stay alert and follow the safety rules. The first step to preventing accidents is preparation. Let's begin by taking a close look at a unique set of signals that are used in the rigging process. Communication is essential in a rigger's work. In order to move a load successfully, both the rigger and the crane operator need to use a number of hand signals. Let's review the basics. To indicate to an operator that you want the hook on the crane lowered, point downward and move your hand in small circles. When the load is ready to be hoisted, raise your arm and point up, then move your hand in small circles. By extending one arm out to the side with your palm facing down and moving your arm back and forth horizontally, you can show that you want the crane to stop. To call for an emergency stop, extend both arms out to the sides with palms down and move your forearms horizontally. There are two other special signals that are used only when working with boom cranes. To show that you want the boom to be lowered, extend your arm and close your fist. Point your thumb down. When you need the boom raised, extend your arm, close your fist, and point your thumb up. Once you are comfortable that everyone can communicate effectively, check with the operator to make sure that the crane has been inspected. That way, both you and the operator will know that the crane is ready to lift safely. Also, make sure that both of you know the weight capacity of the crane. This will help prevent you from overloading it. Inspecting the hook is important too. Never use a hook with a broken or bent safety latch. The sling could slide off of the hook and damage the load or cause an injury. Keep in mind that hooks are made to carry loads at their centers. Never lift a load on the tip of a hook. This can cause the hook to stretch and weaken. If the hook you are about to use has an opening that is stretched 15% or more from its original size or twisted more than 10 degrees, don't use it. Take the time to get another hook. Once the crane and hook have been inspected, you can move on to picking out the proper sling for your job. Slings are used to carry a load. They can be made out of many different types of material, such as chain, wire rope, synthetic fabrics, or metal mesh. When choosing a sling, consider the size, shape, and even the temperature of the load. Knowing the temperature of the load is important because some slings may stretch, melt, or even break in extreme heat. By selecting the right sling, you can make rigging and controlling the load a lot easier and safer. Let's take a look. A chain sling should be used for lifting your heaviest loads. It also works well when you are in a high-temperature environment, such as a steel mill, because it is less likely to be damaged by heat than other types of slings. Before using a chain sling, inspect it for cuts or worn links. By pushing the links together and checking where metal rubs metal, you can find hidden worn spots and catch other potential problems. Synthetic slings are the most flexible type of sling and are used when loads have to be protected from abrasion. Their light weight also helps to reduce fatigue and stress that you and other riggers may experience on the job. Metal mesh slings are best for lifting objects with sharp edges, such as plate steel, since the edges can't cut through the mesh. Metal mesh slings also make it easier to balance a load because of their wide load-bearing surfaces. The most widely used type of sling is the wire rope sling. These are commonly found at construction sites and in other rugged environments. Before working with a wire rope sling, inspect it for broken or severely worn wires. Check the end connections for corrosion or broken wires, as well as kinks, crushed wires, or unwinding strands. If you find any of these conditions, don't use the sling, since it could be weakened. Once you have picked out your sling, you are ready to attach the load. You should start by determining which hitch to use. Let's check it out. A hitch is the way a sling is attached to the load and the hook. There are three basic hitches: the vertical hitch, the basket hitch, and the choker hitch. You can only use vertical hitches on loads equipped with lifting attachments such as eye bolts or latches. To create a vertical hitch, just attach the hoist hook to the sling, then connect the sling to the lifting attachment. A choker hitch works particularly well with wide loads. Wrap the sling snugly around the load, then run one end through the shackle on the other end and fasten it to the hook. Sometimes a regular choker hitch isn't tight enough. In these situations, you should use a double wrap choker hitch. Wrap the sling around the load twice, then loop one end through the other and attach it to the hook. The most commonly used hitch is the basket hitch. To form this hitch, cradle the sling around the load, then place both ends of the sling over the hoist hook. When deciding which hitch to use, keep in mind that the same factors that apply to slings apply to hitches as well. Both the hitch and the sling are affected by the weight, size, and shape of the load. For example, because of its length, a long metal pole would need a double wrap choker hitch to keep it in place. And you would want to use a synthetic sling, since its flexibility and strength would help keep the pole stable. No matter which hitch you are using, it's important not to wrap the hoist rope around the load. This could damage the rope, the hook, or the load itself. The hoist rope should only be used to lift and lower the hook. After you have selected which sling and hitch to use, you still need to determine how to prevent the load from damaging the sling. The easiest way to do this is to place padding around the sling. To protect both the sling and the load, you can place wood or other softeners between them. This will help prevent the sling from cutting into the load, as well as stop the load from causing wear and tear on the sling. Sometimes a load needs more than one sling to keep it stable as it's being lifted. To figure out the safest way to rig the slings, we need to look at sling angles. A sling angle is the angle between a sling and the load itself. By paying close attention to the sling angles for each sling we have rigged, we can be sure that the load will be safe and secure while it is being lifted. The force exerted on each sling increases as its sling angle decreases. If this force exceeds the sling's weight capacity, the sling could break. A sling angle of 90 degrees is ideal because it puts the least stress on the sling. There are two ways to get a sling angle of 90 degrees. One is to use a lifting attachment, and the other is to use a single sling. Unfortunately, most loads don't have lifting attachments, and many loads require two slings. To find the right sling angle for two or more slings, ask your supervisor for a sling angle chart. A sling angle chart lists various sling angle factors. If you are using 2 slings to lift a load, multiply the sling angle factor by half of the weight of the load. That way you can determine what the weight capacity of each sling should be. For example, the sling angle factor for 2 slings attached to a load at angles of 60 degrees is 1.155. So, for a 1,000-pound load, you would multiply 500 pounds, half the load's weight, by 1.155. This tells us that each sling would need to be rated for at least 578 pounds. If the sling angles were 45 degrees, the chart would tell us that each sling would need to have a weight capacity of at least 707 pounds. Sling angles of less than 45 degrees should be avoided because they put too much stress on the sling. Keep in mind that the shorter the sling, the sharper the sling angle will be. So, if you use slings that are too short, you could easily overload them, causing the slings to break. By taking your time and consulting the chart, you can catch sling angle problems and find the slings that are right for your lift. Now that you know how to rig the load, it's time to lift it. Cranes are only intended to lift straight up and down. A diagonal lift puts too much stress on the crane and could tip the crane over. So, before you lift, make sure that the operator has positioned the crane directly over the load and that the outriggers are extended and planted firmly on the ground. While lifting, you also need to be careful of accidental drops. Most often, accidental drops are caused by having a bad angle of the load, the angle between the load and the level ground. Most drops occur when the load isn't parallel to this level ground. Never let the angle of the load exceed 10 degrees. More than that, and the load could slip and fall, damaging material or injuring people. While accidental drops are dangerous, the most common hazard that a rigger faces is electrocution. And the most frequent cause of electrocution is contact with overhead power lines or electrical equipment. Make sure that you know the height of any power lines near your job site, as well as the location of all electrical equipment before you start work. This way you can direct the crane away from danger. You should also keep an eye on the weather. For instance, you don't want to stand next to a crane or hold on to a tag line in a storm. If you do, you could easily become a target for lightning. Now that we've rigged the load safely and know what hazards to look out for during a lift, we're ready to move on. As the lift progresses, you need to pay close attention to the load. Often it can shift and change the angle of the load. Remember, the angle should never exceed 10 degrees from horizontal. Once the load is in the air, the next step is to move it. To help control and position the load, it is often a good idea to use ropes or tag lines. By putting tension on the tag line, you can prevent the load from spinning or help direct it toward its destination. Tag lines can also help you maneuver the load into tight places. During the lift, stop periodically to make sure that the load is secure. As you travel with the load, don't carry it above people or allow anyone to walk under it. When you come to a stopping point, remember, a suspended load should never be left unattended. It's an accident waiting to happen. Move to within a few inches of a good landing point, then slowly lower the load until it is grounded. Once the load is at its final destination, make sure to remove the slings from the hook. If they are left on the hook, they can snag on other objects when the crane starts to move again. Make sure to return the slings to their proper storage place. Now that we know how to rig, lift, and land a load, let's look at one last set of precautions you should take whenever you are rigging: wearing the right protective clothing for the job. The right clothes and gear can protect you from cuts, bruises, and other more serious injuries as well. First, it's important to wear heavy leather gloves. They will protect your hands from rope burns and sharp objects. You should also wear safety shoes with steel toes to protect your feet from heavy equipment or dropped loads. A hard hat and safety glasses will help protect your head and eyes from falling or hanging objects. Sleeveless shirts can leave arms exposed to sharp objects and machinery. Make sure that you are wearing a shirt with sleeves that can protect you from cuts and abrasions. And don't forget to tuck in your shirt tails so they won't get caught on the sling or the load. Rigging plays a pivotal role in crane operations. If a load is not rigged properly, the consequences can be devastating. But by taking the proper precautions, you can get the job done safely. Let's review. Before rigging a load, make sure that both you and the crane operator know the standard hand signals. Know the weight capacity of the crane and the lifting accessories that you are using. Familiarize yourself with the different types of slings and hitches that can be used to rig a load. Make sure every load you rig is secure and that the sling angles are safe. Never carry a load above other workers or allow anyone to walk under a load. And be sure to wear the proper protective clothing and equipment needed for the job you're working on. See? It's not so hard after all. Once you get the hang of it, it can be easy to rig a load safely.